The morning the dust turned red began like any other on the wide breathing plains, where the wind carried the smell of sage and iron, and the sky sat so big it made men feel small. And old Caleb Harlan rose before dawn to mend a fence. He had mended 100 times before, his hands stiff with age but steady with habit, his boots worn thin by decades of honest miles, his son Eli trailing behind him, with a coil of wire over one shoulder, and a hope in his eyes that had not yet learned how cruel the world could be. And they worked in silence, broken only by birdsong and the soft lowing of cattle, until the sound of hooves came hard and fast like a drumbeat of bad news, and 3 riders crested the hill wearing the colors of the Silver Spur outfit. Men who had been swallowing land with contracts and fists, men who laughed too loud and rode like they owned the horizon, and Caleb felt the old weight settle in his chest because he had already refused them. Twice. Refused to sell the last strip of river pasture that kept his cattle alive through dry summers. Refused because a man without his word is poorer than dust. And the lead rider reined in close enough that Eli could see the scar on his cheek, close enough that the smell of whiskey cut through the morning, and the man spoke with a smile that did not reach his eyes, telling Caleb one last time to sign the paper or be moved along. And Caleb answered the only way he knew how, quiet and firm, saying this land fed his father and his father's father, and it would feed his son. And that was when the smile vanished and the fist came. And Eli shouted and ran forward, but another rider knocked him aside, and the world seemed to slow as Caleb fell, the sky spinning. The sound of boots and laughter and the wet thud of blows landing where age had thinned bone and muscle, and they beat him there in the dirt. Beat him until blood painted the dust. Beat him while Eli screamed and begged and tried to crawl back only to be kicked away, and the men left with a warning tossed like trash over a shoulder, saying the land would be theirs by sundown tomorrow. And when the hooves faded, the plains felt too quiet, too wide, and Eli knelt in the dust holding his father, feeling the fragile rise and fall of breath, promising through tears that he would fix this, that he would make it right. But Caleb's eyes, one already swelling shut, held a deeper, older understanding of how such things were fixed, and he whispered for Eli to fetch water and cloth, to tend the cattle, to do nothing foolish. And when the sun climbed higher and the pain settled into a dull roar, Caleb remembered another time, another beating long ago when he had been younger and quicker and learned the hard lesson that a lone man stands little chance against, men who confuse cruelty for strength. And as the day wore on, word spread like smoke on the wind, carried by traders and hunters, and the quiet network of those who still honored the old ways of respect and boundary. And by dusk, a small figure appeared at the edge of the property, an Apache scout named Nantan, who had once shared coffee with Caleb during a winter storm, a man of few words and watchful eyes, who took in the broken fence, the bruised boy, the battered old rancher, and said nothing until Caleb nodded. And then Nantan left as silently as he had come, and Eli did not understand why his father looked relieved instead of afraid, why he told Eli to pack food and water and a blanket and to trust him, why he insisted they ride toward the Badlands under cover of night, instead of barricading the house or riding to town, where lawmen had already been bought, and they traveled through moonlight and shadow, Caleb wincing with every step but driven by a purpose older than pain, until they reached a dry arroyo where stones remembered 1,000 fires, and there they waited. And as the stars wheeled overhead, shapes gathered at the edge of vision, men and women moving with the land rather than against it, elders whose faces carried the map of years, warriors whose presence felt like the steady pull of gravity, and at their center a chief whose gaze weighed more than words. And Caleb spoke not of revenge but of justice, not of hatred but of a promise broken by those who had already taken too much. He spoke of his son's future and the river pasture that fed both cattle and people. He spoke of standing lines and shared water and the respect he had always shown. And when he finished, the chief studied him for a long moment that felt like judgment itself, and then nodded once, and the camp breathed out as if a decision had been waiting to be made, and Eli watched in awe as plans formed without shouting, as riders were sent, as signals were agreed upon, as numbers quietly grew, and he realized with a shiver that this was not a mob but a council, not chaos but order, and the old rancher who had been beaten in the dirt now stood straighter, pain forgotten beneath resolve, and before dawn the land seemed to wake with them. And Caleb put a hand on his son's shoulder and told him that strength is not loud, that it gathers and waits and chooses its moment, and that tomorrow the men who thought themselves untouchable would learn what it meant to face a united front. And as the sun rose red over the plains, Caleb Harlan rode not as a victim, but as a man who had remembered who his allies were. And if this story stirred your heart and you want to hear how the reckoning came, how courage met consequence, and how a father and son reclaimed more than land, make sure you subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss chapter 2, because the next chapter brings the thunder you won't forget.